All right, today we are digging into a really revolutionary idea, one that comes from the turn of the 20th century. It's all captured in Petr Kropotkin's classic work, Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution.
So, when you think of evolution, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, right, it's this vision of just relentless competition. Survival of the fittest, where only the absolute strongest make it. But what if that's only half the story? What if nature isn't really this brutal war of all against all we so often imagine?
Okay, so to really get what Kropotkin was saying, we've got to first understand the idea he was pushing back against. See, back in the late 19th century, a very specific interpretation of Darwin's work had become super popular. And this popular view, it was really championed by figures like T.H. Huxley, who was a big-time Darwinist. Kropotkin actually called Huxley's work his struggle for life manifesto, and it really painted this grim picture of nature as just a constant, bloody battle. It was a worldview that put individual competition, well, above everything else. But halfway across the continent, you've got this other naturalist who's seeing something completely different. We're talking about Petr Kropotkin, a Russian geographer and zoologist. He spent years, and I mean years, studying animal life in the incredibly harsh landscapes of Siberia. And what he saw? It didn't look anything like a gladiator show. Nope, he saw collaboration. He saw support.
And it was these observations, that formed the very basis of his powerful counterargument. Now, Kropotkin wasn't denying that struggle existed, not at all, but he was proposing that another, maybe even more powerful force was at play.
He called it the law of mutual aid, and he was actually building on an idea that was first sketched out by another Russian zoologist, a Professor Kessler. Kropotkin's big argument was this: for the survival and, this is the really crucial part, for the progressive evolution of a species, cooperation was way more important than competition.
So right there, you have this huge contrast in thinking. I mean, on one hand, the popular view saw evolution as all about competition, survival of the strongest individual. But Kropotkin, he saw it as cooperation, the survival of the most sociable group. It was just a totally different way of looking at the entire natural world.
And for Kropotkin, being sociable wasn't just, a nice little bonus. No, it was the single greatest advantage you could have in the struggle for life. He basically argued that any species that failed to cooperate was, in his exact words, doomed to decay.
So you might be wondering, where did he even get this idea? Well, Kropotkin wasn't just some philosopher sitting in an armchair. He was a meticulous, boots-on-the-ground observer of nature. And he gathered just a massive amount of evidence from the animal kingdom to back up his theory.
And I mean, his examples were everywhere he looked. He pointed to ants, saying they'd basically renounced that Hobbesian war of all against all for the good of the whole colony. He saw bees multiplying their individual power by working as a team. He marveled at cranes posting sentries to protect the flock. And he even saw a direct link between the incredible intelligence of parrots and how super sociable they are.
But it wasn't always these grand things, like huge migrations or complex hives, that caught his eye. Sometimes the most powerful evidence, the really profound stuff, came from the smallest, most unexpected moments.
Like one time at an aquarium in Brighton, he saw this big Maluka crab get flipped onto its back. And it was just stuck, helpless. But immediately, its comrades rushed over to the rescue. For a whole hour, Kropotkin just watched as they pushed and strained, trying over and over again to help their trapped friend. And finally, after who knows how many failed attempts, they did it. They succeeded. You see, this wasn't a struggle against each other. It was a struggle for each other.
So Kropotkin became totally convinced. He thought, look, if this law applies to ants and cranes and even crabs, then it has to apply to us too. And so he turned his focus from the natural world to the long story of human society. And this is where he really challenged the big ideas of his day. He argued against this common notion that the nuclear family was, the original starting point for humanity. He said, nope. We started out just like other social animals, in tribes and in bands. Cooperation wasn't some clever thing we invented along the way. It's what made us human from the very beginning.
Kropotkin actually traced this continuous thread of mutual aid all the way through human history. He saw it evolving from the solidarity you'd find in the earliest clans, all the way to the village communities of the so-called barbarian era, and then later into these complex federations of guilds and free cities in the Middle Ages. For him, these weren't just little exceptions to the rule. No, this was the rule. This was the main current of human progress.
And if you look closer at these village communities, it's amazing how deeply this principle was just baked into everything. Land, that wasn't a private thing you owned. It was held in common. Justice, that wasn't some individual matter. Any quarrel was a communal affair, settled by everyone. Life itself was built on a foundation of mutual support and really tight social bonds. So, after this whole journey through natural and human history, what's the big takeaway? Well, Kropotkin's work really offers us a fundamentally different way of looking at pretty much everything, at evolution, at history, and yeah, at ourselves.
So let's break it down. Kropotkin's key argument is that cooperation is a fundamental law of nature. Point 1. Point 2. Being fit is often about being sociable, not just being aggressive. Point 3. Our own progress as a species is a story of mutual support. And finally, and this is a big one, this instinct for cooperation, it isn't some dusty relic of the past. It is alive and well today in every single club, union, or volunteer group that brings people together.
Ultimately, what Kropotkin's work does is throw down a challenge. It challenges that pervasive idea that relentless self-interest is the only thing that drives progress. He's asking us to just look around, look at nature, look at our own communities, and to recognize this powerful, persistent, and deeply rooted instinct we have for mutual aid.
And that leaves us with a huge question, one that's just as relevant today as it was over a century ago. If cooperation really is a fundamental law of nature, what does that mean for us, right now? How might really, truly recognizing that fact reshape our societies, our institutions, and our future?